December 1914. 5 months into the First World War, the war that was supposed to end quickly had settled into the mud. Across the Western Front, men lived underground. They slept in trenches filled with water. They ate cold food. They listened to artillery day and night. And they waited. Christmas was approaching, but Christmas had no place here. There were no trees, no lights, no warmth. Only wire mud and the constant expectation of death. On Christmas Eve, something unusual began to happen. The guns started to fall silent. Not everywhere, but in small sections of the line. The quiet felt wrong. Soldiers were trained to distrust silence. Silence often meant an attack was coming. But this silence held. As night fell, voices carried across no man's land. Singing. Carols. In languages the men on the other side could still recognize. German soldiers sang first. British soldiers listened. Then some of them joined in. Not loudly, not confidently, just enough to be heard. No orders had been given. No ceasefire had been announced. This was not planned. It was spontaneous, and it was dangerous. Any man who stood up risked being shot. Any man who exposed himself could be killed by his own side or the enemy. Still, the singing continued. Candles appeared on trench edges, small lights in a landscape built for darkness. For a moment, the war paused without permission, not because leaders demanded it, but because soldiers allowed it. Men who had spent months firing at shapes in the distance were now hearing voices. Real voices, human voices. Christmas arrived in a place where it did not belong, and no one knew what would happen next. The singing did not stop the war. It only interrupted it. No one knew whether it was a trick, or a trap, or a moment before the guns returned. Every soldier understood the risk. Stepping out meant exposure. Exposure meant death, not just from the enemy, but from your own side. Any movement above the trench line could be mistaken for an attack. Any silhouette could be a target. Still, the silence continued, and the voices kept coming. At some point, listening was no longer enough. Someone had to move. Someone had to step out first. Not because they were brave, but because they were curious. A single soldier climbed out of the trench, hands raised. No weapon, just a figure standing in the open. For a long moment, nothing happened. No shots, no orders, no response. Then another soldier followed. From the other side, they walked slowly toward each other. Across ground that had been killing men for months. The distance felt longer than it was. Every step carried the weight of a mistake. When they finally met, they did not fight. They spoke, awkwardly, carefully, in broken phrases, in gestures, in shared words they barely understood. For the first time, the enemy had a face, an age, a voice, a name. Others began to follow, one by one, cautiously. Men who had been ordered to hate were now standing close enough to see fear in each other's eyes. The war had not ended, but for a moment, it had lost its grip, and no one knew how far this moment would go. Once the first words were spoken, the tension began to loosen, not all at once, but enough to change the atmosphere. Soldiers stood closer together, then closer still. Hands were shaken, awkwardly, cautiously. Some laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because laughter released the fear. Cigarettes were offered, then accepted. Food was shared. Bread passed from hand to hand. Small personal items were exchanged. Buttons, badges, photographs from home. Proof that lives existed beyond the trenches. Men compared ages. Many were barely out of school. They compared accents, compared families, compared how long they had been here. They spoke in broken sentences, in gestures, in words borrowed from each other's languages. The enemy became specific. A face, a voice, a person standing close enough to touch. For a brief time, no man's land lost its meaning. It was no longer a killing ground. It became shared ground. Someone produced a football. No one remembers exactly who. It did not matter. The ball rolled across the mud. No referee, no rules, no score that mattered. Men ran carefully at first, then freely, boots slipping in the mud, laughter carrying into the night. For a short while, the war was pushed to the edges of the field. This was not peace. It was not forgiveness. It was recognition. Recognition that the men facing each other were not monsters. They were soldiers. And for this moment, they allowed themselves to be human. But the night was still young, and the war had not disappeared. The game did not last forever. Nothing here could. As the morning light grew stronger, the laughter began to fade. Not because anyone wanted it to, but because daylight brought consequences. Officers appeared at the trench edges. Some watched in silence. Others were alarmed. This was not allowed. No orders had been given. No permission had been granted. Messages were sent up the chain of command, and the answers came back quickly. The truce was unofficial, temporary, unacceptable. Men were ordered back to their lines. Reluctantly, they obeyed. Hands were shaken one last time. Names were exchanged. Promises were made. Promises no one knew how to keep. The football was set aside. The candles burned low. Soldiers climbed back into their trenches. Slowly, quietly, across no man's land, the distance returned. Rifles were picked up again. Positions were reoccupied. The war resumed its shape. In some sectors, the guns stayed silent for a few more hours. In others, they opened fire almost immediately. By the end of the day, the truce was over. Orders were enforced. Fraternization was forbidden. Some units were punished. Others were simply warned. High command made sure this would not happen again. But something had already changed. The men now knew who was on the other side. They had spoken. They had laughed. They had played together, and that knowledge could not be erased. The war would continue, but for those who were there, it would never feel quite the same again. The war did not end that night. It continued. Relentlessly. For 4 more years, millions would still die. The Christmas truce changed none of that. Not on paper, not in strategy rooms, not in the orders that followed. By the next Christmas, there would be no singing. No candles, no football. High command made certain of it. Orders were rewritten. Discipline was tightened. Fraternization became a crime. The war learned from the truce, and it closed the door behind it. But something had already happened, something that could not be undone. Because for one night, ordinary soldiers made a choice. They were not ordered to stop. They were not instructed to sing. No commander approved the silence. It happened anyway. Men who had spent months firing at shapes, in the distance, heard voices instead. Real voices. Human voices. They learned names. They saw faces. They laughed together. They shared food. They shared memories. They played a game in the middle of a battlefield, built for death. That moment did not win the war, but it revealed something dangerous. That the war did not come from the men who fought it. They did not design it. They did not benefit from it. And when given even the smallest freedom, they did not choose violence. They chose silence. They chose connection. They chose to recognize the enemy as human. That frightened those in charge, because war does not survive on hatred alone. It survives on obedience, on distance, on the refusal to see who stands on the other side. The Christmas truce broke that illusion, and so it could not be allowed to happen again. The trenches closed, the guns returned, orders were enforced, and the war resumed its shape. But the men remembered. Even as they fought, even as they obeyed, they remembered a night when killing was optional, a night when peace existed without permission. History often remembers victories. It remembers generals. It remembers dates and maps. But sometimes, what matters most is what was possible. For a few hours in December 1914, the world proved that even in the worst war it had known, something else could exist. Not because it was commanded, not because it was planned, but because it was allowed. And that is why it has never been forgotten.